Welcome to In the Seams, a podcast by Broken and Mended. And now your host, David Hefflin.
Well, I want to welcome you back to In the Seams, and we're excited to have a guest today, Tveen Verano. And we were connected through some mutual connections, particularly Laura Silverman, who was on this show a couple of months back. And so I'm going to also include that show again in the show notes, the link, so people can go back and listen to that. So I'm very happy that we got connected through her, Tveen, and first of all, just welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, what brings you here, and we'll say also for the sake of our audience, is certainly not an easy topic. It is something that, as you were sharing earlier, just before we went on, on air, it's the kind of topic that, it's hard to listen to as a young parent until you've kind of gone through something like what you've gone through. And I know there are people who will hear this podcast who have had a child who had a cancer diagnosis, and that's what you had to deal with, you and your family. I believe he was 2 years old. Is that correct? When
Yes,
that started?
2.5. Yeah.
And that was not that long ago. I mean, we're talking 2024 when that started. Is that correct?
Yes, September 2024. Okay. Got diagnosed. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we want to share your story. I want you to share your story in part because I know it will bless people who've gone through a similar thing. We also have others that are listening who maybe their kids don't have cancer, but they're going through some kind of childhood chronic illness. And, that brings a lot of difficulty and pain to the family as well. And so I know your story will be an encouragement, not because anybody would have chosen that kind of story, but because God was with you in it. And so I just want to begin. We'll do a little before and after here. Tell me a little bit about your life in 2024. So before September of that year, what did ordinary life look like in your home? And you had started homeschooling too. So kind of what were you most excited about as you started homeschooling?
Yes. So before September, actually, we did decide to homeschool that year. But even before that, in January of 2024, I actually had a miscarriage. And then in March, I had another miscarriage. And so already that year started off pretty heavy for our family. Already that year, I was like, what? Why? And I mean, I maybe took it for granted, but we had 3 kids without many. I had a high-risk pregnancy with my first, but nothing to cause any alarm. We had 3 healthy babies, or so I thought. And the miscarriages were just something that was really broke me down. And through all of that, we had already kind of talked about homeschooling for a few years. And I was just like, you know what? I want to bring the kids home. It's now or never in a way. The older they get, the harder it might get. And so my husband was on board, and we decided that May to bring the kids home to homeschool. So my daughter Emma was going into the 2nd grade, and then my daughter Lily was going into kindergarten, and then Alex was 2 years old, just a happy 2-year-old kind of joining the party when he felt like it. That summer of 2024, we went to Mammoth with our really close friends. Alex was hiking 6 hours a day, running around. And we had just started homeschooling 3 weeks before his diagnosis. So 3 weeks before his diagnosis, I finally started living that dream life. I had homeschooling on my mind for 3 years before we were brave enough to do it, and it was 3 weeks of just this quote, perfect homeschool routine and things like that. I'm also a registered dietitian. So I had my own practice, my own business. I would coach women through nutrition and faith-based mindset work when it comes to their health and renewing their mind around food and health. I was very passionate about that as well. So before this, things looked pretty normal and boring, maybe a little bit as a family of 5. But after September, I realized how much I appreciated boring so much after what happened with my son. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, it sounds like life was going, if boring, at least going well, right? And
yes.
Healthy kids, a job that you felt passionate about. And your husband, what's his name?
His name is Jerusalem. His first name is Jerusalem. I call him Vasken. That's
Okay.
his like Armenian middle name.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, so he's a civil engineer. He works from home as well ever since 2020. It turned into like I'll work from home for 2 weeks, and then he still
Sure.
he still works from home now. But we loved being home together. Our family, like we loved being home, and so homeschooling just felt like a natural extension of that. And all five of us were. I remember our first day of homeschooling. We had an earthquake in California, which often happens. And so
Right.
my husband, who's an engineer, did this whole like little thing for the kids under the table, all about earthquakes and how the earth shifts and what caused an earthquake. So we were really loving being home. Like we're a very tight knit family, and we really appreciated those slow, ordinary days at home together.
Right. Well, things, as you already alluded to, did not stay boring. And, things started to change in September. And I, just for the audience's benefit, will mention I've listened to your story on another podcast, and I know it involved, started with some of your family getting COVID. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
My
Tell us
my
what
husband.
happened there.
Yeah, so it started with my husband. He tested positive September 2nd for COVID. And as COVID works, the next day my daughters both tested positive, and then the following day my son and I tested positive. And we had all gotten sick before, and so I was just kind of letting it run its course. My daughters got over it in about like 8 hours. Like they literally like got over it so
Yeah.
quickly. But Alex, after 5 days of a fever, he was not getting better. He stopped eating, he stopped drinking, he stopped walking, which, like I said, a month prior, we were hiking in Mammoth with him and going to the beach and all these things. He was not himself. He had 102 fevers, even with Tylenol, Motrin, all of the things we do to manage fevers. And so I actually took him into urgent care and then a hospital by us, because urgent care said take him to the hospital. 5 days is abnormal for the fever. And they told me they just gave him fluids because he hadn't drank, his blood work came back that he was dehydrated. And then they just drew me a clock and they said, give Tylenol at noon and give Motrin at 3 and give Tylenol at 6. And I remember just
Hmm.
staring at the nurse like, I've been doing that for days and I know
Right.
something's going on. This is not how my son acts. But I went back home and I did the Tylenol Motrin thing. And then the next day, our pediatrician said, oh, I see that Alex was at Huntington Hospital. I want to see him. You just know post ER visit, she wanted to see him, which thank God. And I will just say we
Yeah.
had switched to this pediatrician a year ago. And I think that was a God thing that we switched to this pediatrician a year ago. And so she saw us in office, and let's remember I have COVID too. So I'm exhausted, he's exhausted. And so I'm sitting in her office, we're wearing our masks. And I told her, I was like, I can't even put him down. He won't even let me put him down. And she said, well, what happens when you put him down? And sat him down, or I stood him up, he's 2.5, and he limped twice, screamed, and fell to the ground. And she said, I don't want to scare you,
Goodness.
but a limp with a fever, that's like a red flag for leukemia. We first thought leukemia. Ended up not being leukemia, but she said, my husband's an oncologist at CHLA, and I think you need to go get seen at CHLA just to rule it out, just so we know what we're dealing with.
Right.
And I remember frantically texting my mom and mother-in-law that I'm driving Alex to CHLA, and this is what the pediatrician said. And my mother-in-law was like, I only pray to God she's wrong. I pray to God she's wrong. And my mom met me at CHLA, my husband. They even said, this is just a bad case of COVID. That why would your pediatrician scare you? There's no way this is cancer. And the doctor there actually said, we see kids much sicker than your son at this hospital. Like, I think he's
Wow.
fine. Yeah. Um, it's just, now I know on the other end of things that childhood cancer, it's not the first thing a doctor thinks of. It's not the first like
Hmm.
differential diagnosis, right? And so I do understand why they didn't really jump to cancer because he was testing positive for COVID. His lab work showed inflammation markers, but again, he was sick fighting a virus. And so a lot of things were overlapping in their brains. And so I went back home again and they gave him very strong Motrin at the hospital at CHLA. By the time I got home, it had worn off. I gave him Tylenol. I just started that whole merry-go-round again. And by day 7 or 8, I don't remember, I think it was maybe day 8, my pediatrician again was like kind of pestering us at this point, called my husband and said, listen, I'd rather lose you guys as patients, but you need to go back and I'm going to make sure you guys get admitted. Like, this is not normal. 8 days of 102 fever is not okay.
No.
So, we went back to the hospital. We knew we were getting admitted. We got admitted, and we got admitted September 11th. And by September 14th, we already had the cancer diagnosis. They first thought that it was an orthopedic issue, which again, a God thing. The orthopedic surgeon we ended up having ended up coming back to us on our last day and laid his hands on Alex and like prayed over him. But anyways, he thought it was like a hip infection, and so he was like, "I'm going to do an open biopsy, and if I find cancer, I can't do anything. But if I see an infection, I can clean his bone because I guess." I didn't know, like bone infections, things like that are pretty serious. He's like, I'll immediately clean it and then we'll know what it is. And so they did the open biopsy, and within 30 minutes, we got the call that the surgeon needs to see us. And I already knew at that point, like 30 minutes, like this is cancer. And my husband is like the biggest optimist. He's like, there's no way Alex has cancer. He was like angry, there's no way this is cancer. And it ended up being cancer. We heard the word malignant. We heard, I'm so sorry. And then we were now oncology's patients. And so then, after that, it's just one test after the other. We thought leukemia or there was this other cancer called neuroblastoma. And this whole time, my husband's an engineer researching, and he's like, oh, hopefully it's leukemia. It's like 95%, 95% children like recover from leukemia, never deal with it again. And neuroblastoma was like 60, 70% survival rate. And it came back as neuroblastoma. And then it came back as high risk aggressive, which basically meant that it was in over 75% of his body, was already in his bone marrow and heavily in his pelvis and femur, which is why he wasn't walking. And it's still crazy to me that a month before he was fine. And so I kept saying that to doctors, like, but he was fine. They said, with childhood cancer, everything is fine until it's not fine all of a sudden.
Right.
And it just felt like our whole world was completely shattered at that point. And then after that, just a long treatment protocol, a year and a half of a lot of hospital stays, lots of vomit, bald head, all of the things that you think of. We went through it with Alex. But yeah, that was the start of a lot of things changing, obviously, for our family. So.
It's hard to imagine if you're someone like myself who has kids that hasn't been through that. In some ways we would say, oh, that's our worst fear. And so as this is all hitting you guys like just a bombshell, was it just overwhelming grief, or was it more like shock? I mean, how emotionally were you processing those early days, especially after you've heard the word cancer, you've heard the word malignant? How are you able to kind of stay emotionally centered, or maybe you weren't able to, but just kind of what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, we had our moments. My husband and I were both together at the hospital for this stay, which I'm grateful for. After this one, we kind of had to tag team a lot because we had other kids. But we were pretty emotional. I would say shocked and emotional. Lots of tears in that hospital room when it was just me and my husband alone. I've never seen, I know he won't mind that I share, I'd never seen my husband cry like that before. And as the daddy of the house, he was just so broken that he couldn't fix this. He couldn't provide it away, protect it away, like all those things. He couldn't do anything. We felt completely hopeless. And because I think of the miscarriages, I just kept, when I had those miscarriages earlier that year, the Goodness of God song was something I played on repeat in our house, because I just wanted to especially teach my kids that God is good even when life is not. Life is not going to always be good, but God is good, and he's in there, in the dark, in the storms, in the hardship of life. He's still there, because I never wanted them to lose their faith or their belief that God is God even when life is awful. And so I just kept telling my husband that. I said, we're not exempt from suffering. As believers, as Christians, we're not exempt from suffering. It's not like God doesn't promise us a beautiful life, but on the other side of that, you never think it's going to be your child. And I think that's what shocked us the most. You read a lot about these stories, or you see them as a third person observer. And I remember sitting in the hospital being like, I am the mom of a cancer child. I am a cancer mom, and I have to figure out how to do this. And I called my cousin who has a son who went through heart issues as a baby. She spent a lot of time at children's hospitals. And her son is thriving now, plays club volleyball, an athlete. He's wonderful. But I remember calling her and saying, I'm not cut out for this. I'm not cut out to be in this world. And she said, you don't have a choice. God is going to equip you. God will match your situation with his grace and his strength, because this is where you are. You are Alex's mom right now, and he knew this was going to happen. So you have no choice. You are going to be equipped, and he's going to strengthen you. And that was really what I needed to hear, because there was so much, advocating, so much that as a mother, like they call you a medical mama at one point, because you just learned so much about this terrible sickness and the meds, and I had to give him injections at home. Like it was just so much that just changed everything about our life. And I really believe that the emotions brought us closer to God, the brokenness brought us closer to God, and ultimately we could only rely on God. That's what this type of thing does. I feel like it spiritually prunes you, unfortunately, but it just draws you closer and closer to the Lord. So that's really what we tried to focus on. Of course, there were moments of anger, moments of like, why God, why him, why our
Sure.
son, but I think those thoughts were also safe with God. So we just
Yeah.
prayed them up to God in a way. So yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. Because that's the hope that we need, is that God is with us in those kind of moments. God is not abandoning us. And even that you said you drew closer to him. I always think of the passage that talks about draw near to me and I will draw near to you, that God desires to be close to us in those situations. And so it's encouraging to hear that, especially like that, what you said earlier, based on the goodness of God song, that God is good even when life is not. And there are many times when life is not. And I think probably no more than when something's going on with your child of this magnitude.
Oh
I do
yeah.
want to talk just a moment about the treatment for him, for you guys. What was the hardest part of that? And along with that, to speak about how Alex was doing through. I mean, I know he's two. I'm assuming comprehension is limited to a large degree, but he knows
Yeah.
he's sick, maybe, and he's just struggling. So, kind of, what was that like for him, and what was the treatments like for you guys watching all this?
Yeah. It was hard. He was 2.5. He also had a speech delay before this. We had a lovely speech therapist who actually lived 2 blocks from CHLA and would visit him so much when he was in the hospital. She was completely crushed when all of this happened, but he wasn't very verbal, which was why, when he was saying owie owie when he had a fever, I was like, oh well, he's sick. He has body aches. He has COVID. But we had to kind of get it out of him. He finally pointed to the leg that they biopsied on him, but he was
Mm-hmm.
little. He's a baby. He's in diapers. He kept saying, why am I here? And we kept saying, because you're sick. And he would say, I'm not sick. I'm not sick.
Mm-hmm.
He just wanted to play. We got so many stuffies and gifts and books and toys at the hospital. So for him, it was rough. Obviously, he did 5 rounds of chemo with immunotherapy. We had 2 bone marrow transplants, which were month-long hospital stays each. So 30 days and then another 30 days. And then we had radiation and then more immunotherapy. It was a lot on him. He did, the typical vomiting. At one point, he was vomiting so much they thought that there was a new tumor growing in his brain, and
Oh.
the chemo wasn't even working because he's still vomiting. And so that was a terrifying, 24 hours until they did a scan and they were like, no, it's just the chemo's hitting him rough. So he actually did not gain any weight throughout this whole thing. As a, now he's 4. So in the last 1.5-ish years, he stayed pretty much the same weight. He went down a lot,
Mm.
obviously, with all the cancer treatment. And for him, though, we did try to make it as fun as possible, buying him a new toy every time we were going to stay there. We'd order the food he liked. We got blessed with a lot of DoorDash gift cards, thank the Lord, because the hospital food was not that good. And so, getting him the burger he wanted, or taking walks around the hospital when he could leave the room unless he was in isolation. And so he, I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's residual stuff, with him that maybe we'll see later on. But he still was a very much a typical 2, 3-year-old boy wanting to play, wanting to watch his movies. The main thing that kind of impacted his quality of life was he had a central line placed in his chest, and this was the
Mm.
type that he could not get wet or submerge in water. So again,
Oh,
a
okay.
boy who loves to play in water, play in dirt, it was a line directly connected to, it's a central line, and if it got infected, it could cause a heart infection or cause sepsis overall. And so
Right.
he couldn't play in dirt, which he used to love helping my husband garden. He couldn't swim. He couldn't get wet. And so we had to kind of do sponge baths for him and be really careful. So that was really hard. They would want to run in the sprinklers like a typical kid, and he wouldn't be able to do that. But that was the main thing that kind of impacted his quality of life. And then he also did end up having hearing loss from chemo, which happens often. And they say it's not reversible, it's permanent hearing loss. So we have hearing aids at home. Does he wear them? It's a struggle to get them into his 4-year-old ears sometimes. He really doesn't
Sure.
want to, but I'm trying because it will affect his speech, with hearing loss this young.
Mm.
But overall, he even asked me the other day, he was like, when are we sleeping at the hospital again? I was like, we're not. Like, we're not. Lord willing, we never have to sleep there again. But I think for him, we really did try to make it fun. He got one-on-one time with me and my husband, just me with him or just my husband with him. And so I think he has as fond as you can memories, but we'll see probably as he gets older. But yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Is so his status now sounds like that the treatments that he was going through are behind him. What is his
Yes.
medical status today?
Yeah. So right now he's considered in remission. We rang his bell in January, actually, so about a month ago. And actually, the physician's assistant right before he said, with the way Alex's cancer presented, his response is unremarkable and highly unusual. Which I love hearing those words because I'm like, that's because of God. When he presented,
Right.
he had weeks to live. They told us he has weeks to live. And no parent wants to be in that. We got asked like, why didn't you go to a second opinion? And I was like, he has weeks to live, and we have the evidence. He's limping, he's not eating, so the fact that he had weeks to live, and they even said there were certain, markers they found, I won't get too technical, but certain markers they found on his cancer cells that would point to like chemo resistance or not being able to respond. And he
Mm.
responded beautifully, praise the Lord. And he even said it's
Praise the Lord.
remarkable and
Yeah.
highly unusual. And so right now he's in remission. He does have scans every 3 months for the next 2 years. Neuroblastoma, unfortunately, has a high relapse rate, which I like to not think about, but it is a reality.
Right.
So they're pretty aggressive with monitoring. So every 3 months, his next set of scans are in April, and so he'll have scans to kind of score his body and make sure that he's still in remission. And then after 2 years, it's every 6 months, and then every year. So we still have hospital appointments ahead and things like that, but overall, we're really enjoying his like not having to go to the hospital multiple times a week and not having to sleep there, and um, trying to get him to start homeschooling with us at the table, which is a little difficult for again a 4-year-old boy who just wants to run around and play.
Right.
But overall, he's doing well. He responded, and right now we're done with active treatment. It's just follow-ups at this point. Yeah.
I'm very glad to hear that. And yes, I think praise the Lord is obviously the correct response to that. And
Yes.
so we will praise the Lord with you.
Thank you.
I do want to talk about family dynamics during the kind of the heat of the crisis, if you will, just because I know, like, even in the things my wife and I have dealt with, and we've not dealt with what you're talking about, but we've dealt with some things, and
Mhm.
the way that we handle things are differently from one another. And it took a while for us to learn that. And we've grown through that. And I think we're better communicators now. But I'm just curious, for you and your husband, did you handle things in a similar way? How did you stay together and connected through this?
Yeah. We, I honestly, so we are pretty different with how we handle things. I like to like map things out, bullet points, plan, like talk, overly communicate. And my husband is like, let's just have a little fun and we'll deal with it later. Like
Yeah.
we're very different. But with something like this, I think God really helped us be there for each other in the way we both needed it. And we even got comments from some of the nurses, like, there's something different about you and your husband. Like, there, when we come in here, there's like peace in this room. And I was like, well, that's again because of God, but also we had a whole like army of people praying for us and for our marriage, for our kids, like for specifics, because cancer has broken up a lot of families. I know people who the parents end up getting a divorce or things like that
Mm.
just because of the strain. So we really did try to remain together and on the same page and be there for each other. It did get hard as we were expected to still go through our real life. Like my husband went back to working. He was working from home, but he took 2 weeks off initially when we got actually. He didn't even. He was still working from the hospital, but he tried to take time off when we first got the diagnosis. But then when we got back home, it was like, okay, like I still have to cook meals. I have to do laundry. I
Right.
have to homeschool. There's normal life that we still need to do. We have two other kids we're raising. It can't only be about the sick one. And so that was more challenging, giving him the time to work and, letting him focus because he obviously had a hard time too, focusing on work and then also trying to take care of everyone. And so we didn't, get a lot of dates in or anything like that, but we just tried to enjoy our time, our days together as a family, and everything became a celebration. And that's what I love about my husband. Everything was like, we're all home today. Let's make pancakes. Yay, we're all home. Like I said at the beginning, we're a family who loves to all be home. I mean, we homeschool, we enjoy each other. And so it was really difficult to be splintered, whether it's for appointments, for those long hospital stays. Um, and so he really was like, oh, everyone's feeling good. Let's drive to the beach, or let's, go to the park. Like he really tried to infuse as much joy in our family as possible, when I wanted to just like, my coping mechanism is like planning, like plan. And that can also keep you stuck, because then you're not acting. You're just sitting there with like paper and pen trying to figure everything out. And so much was out of our control. And it was just like, we can only do what we can do, and trust that God is going to carry us through this. But we really did try to stay in communication as much as we could and just be there for each other. And it was some seasons, it was funny. We would joke that like when I was having a hard day, he was like the strong one. And when he was having a hard day, I would be the strong one. And so we were always kind of there to balance each other out with how we were feeling. So
That's pretty powerful in the way you guys complimented one another in that way. And I'm especially touched by the centering of joy in the midst of a extremely hard circumstance, and the fact that you could emphasize that joy and living in the moment together, and celebrating the occasions to be at home or to go to the park, or the whatever it might be, a birthday, or so that's powerful. And I think people need to hear that, because I think sometimes, again, the assumption is, maybe if this is just starting for someone, or even if we're just imagining something that like that happening, it's like, you must be, totally 100%, sad and depressed the entire time and can barely function. And
yeah,
that's not going to work when you're, like I said, you're raising two other girls, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and and have a marriage that you don't want to only maintain, but you still want it to bless one another in that marriage. And so I can see that God was with you guys in that. And I know you had a lot of support from others. I got this from the other podcasts I listened to. You talked about the DoorDash here too, and but just a lot of loving support and people coming to your aid. And that's powerful, because you need community around you, loving Christian community, obviously your family itself. And it sounds like you really had that in spades. And so
yes.
I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that, but yeah.
Yeah, we have a huge family. We have a lot of church family. We had, homeschool friends. We had a lot of people that came around us, people I didn't even know, and would send us DoorDash gift cards, or the kids. I mean, they got spoiled. Every day there was like an Amazon package with like a new toy for the girls, because they were home. All we did was take them to the hospital, and then we didn't come back for 2 weeks. And then we have to tell them about this like heavy diagnosis. And, it affects siblings a lot too. And so we had, we're very blessed that both of our parents live near us, and they are healthy, and they took care of the kids. They would have sleepovers. We had, like I said, a lot of church family, a lot of friends. I don't know how we would have gotten through this without that. And they tangibly helped, but they also prayed. So my daughter's friends made these Alex's Army bracelets, and
Oh,
were,
awesome.
selling them as like a little fundraiser for us. And it was cool to see kids praying for my kid, like kids all over were wearing them and praying for Alex. And I don't know how we would have done it. And I also had this comfort. My little cousin, she was like 18 at the time. My little cousin called me and said, when you and Baskin are tired of praying, don't worry. We're all interceding for you guys. We're all interceding for you guys. And that was just such a comfort, because sometimes we didn't even have words. We were just like, why? Like there's just that like groan, of like, what is happening to our family? And we'd look at Alex and we'd be like, is he going to be around? Like it was a very real fear. And for a while we didn't know if this was working. We kind of had to trust the process, and then we would finally get scans to show that it was working. But I had that comfort that people were interceding for us and praying for us, even while we felt like weak and spiritually drained. So community is huge. And, like I said, I had a business before. I would use my Instagram to market my business and share inspiring content and encourage women. And then I started sharing about Alex. And part of me was like, do I share? Social media is so, nowadays. But if it wasn't for social
Sure.
media, like so many people would not have prayed for him. And so there's this beauty of bringing people together through stories like this. And people all over the world were praying for him because of social media, because of Facebook, because of things that like that. And so we're really, really grateful for community like that. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Your daughters, so how old were they when all this was going on?
so when it happened, they were 7 and 5. And so now they're almost 9. No, yeah, almost 9. My middle just turned 7. But they were 7 and 5 when all of this happened.
And was there a way of dealing with this different from one another?
Yes, it's so funny. My oldest is the typical anxious, like oldest child, and my middle is more so concerned. It's like a me, myself, and I phase sometimes with her. But it's not funny. I can laugh now, but when we were telling them, my husband was like, "How am I going to tell them?" And I was like, "We just have to tell them." And so we sat them down in the hospital room and we said, "Alex is very sick, and it's a different sickness. We can't give him medicine at home. We have to come here a lot and give him medicine here. So we're going to be here a lot." And, my middle immediately was like, "Is it contagious? Like, can I catch it? Is that, because they think of sickness as something contagious, right?" We said, "No, it's not contagious." And then my oldest was just like looking at my husband and she was like, "Is he going to die?" And, you don't want to make a promise you can't keep. And so in that moment, my husband, which he still questions if he said the right thing or not. And he was like, "Well, we're trying to not let that happen. That's why we're going to be here a lot." And my oldest Emma just like crumbled in his arms, completely burst into tears. I think she just connected the dots that this is something he could die from, and this is something serious. And even um, to this day, they'll ask me questions, they'll bring things up, and they we worry. They pray for all the children at the hospital. They pray that children's hospital will close down because there's no more sick kids. Like they pray, very
Oh,
cute
yeah.
prayers like that. But they did deal with it differently. Lily, my middle, was always upset when I was leaving because she wanted me. She was upset that I wasn't home, and my oldest Emma was more concerned about Alex and if he was going to be okay, because I think she realized like the gravity of the situation a little bit more. Yeah, and now
Sure.
she's almost 9, so she's definitely matured through this, and I just pray that again God uses this as a way to strengthen them, because sadly I've heard from a lot of people that the siblings really suffered because everything was about the sick kid, and so the siblings are messed up for life. Like I heard that a few times from different families. And I was like, I don't want to think that way. I want to think that God is protecting them, sparing them. I pray that, as much as of course we're all going to have residual trauma from what happened, that God can use it for good, even in their
Yeah.
lives. That's my ultimate prayer. So, yeah.
We were talking a little bit about, how some people are able to be present in a moment like this better than others. Uh, and this was all before we went on air, but, that some people struggle with that. And you extended grace toward those people, right? Maybe they haven't been through something similar enough to connect, or maybe it's the way they're wired or whatever it may be. But I am curious what actually was helpful to you. What kind of presence was helpful for you when people came to walk alongside you in this? You can contrast to what was not helpful if you want, but just kind of give us an idea. Maybe some others listening are supporting friends that are going through this, and it might
Yeah.
be helpful for them to know what supported you the most.
Yeah. Well, it always supported me when people said they were praying. And even in the moment, some people would be like, "Just prayed for you. Our family just prayed for you." That was really encouraging, that in the moment we were being thought of. Because I was sharing our journey on social media as much as I could. I still tried to weave in my nutrition and I wanted to be an uplifting space, but I was still sharing like, "Oh, we're in the hospital. He's not feeling well. Can you pray?" And so a lot of people would be praying or asking for prayer for Alex every time he would be going into for more treatment. That was very helpful. We were allowed visitors, which was so helpful. Except for a bone marrow transplant, we weren't allowed any visitors. But during our regular, chemotherapy stays, we were allowed visitors, which was so nice. People would bring me like crumble cookies or a sweet or a coffee and just sit with me, because it can get pretty. You can go stir crazy in a hospital room for as many days as we spent.
Mm.
I read a lot of books. My Goodreads, I
Yeah.
read over like 100 something books last year just because I was at the hospital so much.
Wow.
um, Alex slept a lot, so I just read.
Yeah.
But being people coming in really helped me get my head out of my own cancer world there with Alex. So that was really encouraging. And then letting us feel how we felt. I did get some comments on social media sometimes if I would post like the broken heart emoji. Someone would like, why do you keep, posting a broken heart? It's like, because I'm brokenhearted, because my heart is breaking for my son, and I wish I could be doing this instead of him. I wish they could just hook me up and I could just do this all. And so I think it's okay to be brokenhearted. The Bible says the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. He doesn't say don't be upset. I heard that a lot. Like, don't be upset. Why are you upset? Don't be upset. And I would just be like, are you kidding? This is like very upsetting, to say the least. Like you said, it's a parent's worst nightmare that this is the diagnosis, right? So again, you have to give people grace. I realize, and my husband realized, that some people are more comfortable around brokenness and pain, especially if they've experienced their own pain. They can really mourn with those who mourn a little more comfortably, because it is pretty uncomfortable. For example, before I had my miscarriages, I never knew what to say to friends who had a miscarriage, and then now that I went through my own suffering, I feel like I'm more equipped to be there for others. Not that it makes the suffering any less painful, but I think sometimes people just don't know what to say and what to do, and they don't want to say something that is not helpful. But I think just people's presence and feeding us and praying for us were very helpful. And like I said, allowing us to be sad or worried. Don't worry or don't be upset was a little, I know the Bible says don't worry, don't be anxious, but letting us kind of go through those natural human emotions of like, this is a big deal that's happening, and then entering into it with us with prayer was incredibly helpful. So
sometimes I wonder, with people that struggle, like you said, to sit with brokenness, if it just somehow, they're afraid for themselves, or afraid that they won't be able to. Maybe they're afraid that somehow God doesn't come out of this thing looking vindicated or something, and so they have to say something that ends up being pretty trite and shallow. But I completely agree with you and what you were stressing there. And Andres put in our comments here, our producer, the verse. So Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near the brokenhearted. He saves those crushed in spirit. So what powerful reassurance that is, for sure.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'm curious, since you brought up a little lighter note, although you may have read some things that helped you during that time. If you read 100 books in a year, what kind of books were you reading? Was there anything that actually meant something to you in a special way during that time?
Yeah, so I tried to balance out my genres because I didn't want too many heavy things while I was there, but I also read a lot of books that encouraged my faith. So I read Take Courage, Dear Heart, based off of the C.S. Lewis quote from Narnia about just having courage in difficult times. I read a book that Unmet Expectations, I think it was called, about when life disappoints you and how to deal with that as a believer, as someone who trusts God. What do you do when life disappoints you? I read Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table twice because that was, I think it's from Louis Gigolo. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but that was a really good one. I went through Psalm 23 and just, verse by verse. That book was really helpful for me. I did read like light romantic comedies. I actually read a lot of Jane Austen. I love Jane Austen. And so I read some of her books, reread some of her books. I read Little Women. I read Tale of Two Cities, which is a very long book. But I tried to read some classics too. So a little bit of everything. I read a lot of homeschool books, which was a little difficult for me because I wasn't homeschooling as much as I wanted to be homeschooling. But I still tried to, I was still a homeschool mom. And on the days that I wasn't homeschooling, my dad was actually coming. My dad retired and he would come and homeschool the kids for me so they would stay consistent. Consistency is huge when you're homeschooling. And so I was trying to read all of those books too. So I did read a little bit of everything, like a nice balance.
That was probably pretty wise, and you probably needed some lighter stuff. By the way, Tale of Two Cities is one of my favorite books because it just has, it is. Just because of its just Christian, it's really kind of based on the idea of the love of Christ, right, and sacrifice. And
sacrifice.
I won't give any away.
No, I know.
If we inspire anybody to go read it, I won't give away spoilers. It has been out for a couple hundred years, so they should have.
And I was like, whoa, like it's you think about it for sure afterwards. So yeah.
takes a little while to get into it, at least from my experience, just because it was written so differently. And it's like
Yeah.
Dickens does not spare any words when he's describing
No,
something. And
no, not at
but
all. Not at
yes, the
all.
story
Yeah.
itself was amazing.
It's so
So.
good. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think what I would like to do too is just so we will put some links to those books that you mentioned that were helpful to you in that situation. The
Yes.
Louis, and I don't know either, Gigolo or
Yeah.
book,
It's good
and
to
then the
know.
unmet. What was the other one? Something
And
expectations or
unmet expectations.
okay? Was that the one he wrote?
No, his was don't give the enemy a seat at your table. Is
Oh,
based
okay.
off.
And I've heard of that one actually. I've heard of that
So
one. I haven't read it, but I heard of it. Yeah. So
yeah.
we'll put a couple links for people there. Are there any other just kind of resources that you would recommend for people who are going through something like this, especially early on?
Yeah. I think being aware of what you're consuming. Maybe this won't be popular, but I was told to join support groups, and I did not. And I'm very grateful I did not because joined one on Facebook, and within an hour, I was like, I need to leave because it was just a lot of bad stories. And I think, like I said, there are bad stories out there, but when you are actively going through cancer with your child, and you don't know what the outcome's going to be, I think it's really important to like even our doctors were saying don't google things, don't just go try to find your own information sometimes, and just really like protecting, guarding your heart and guarding your mind. And so I did have like one other mom who had gone through cancer that I felt like I could talk to about things. So I guess resources would be people that you trust, would be a resource, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to stay off of like the public forums where like lots of cancer families were talking all at once because it you can obviously pray for them, but when they're, it just was very, it didn't help me be like energized to take care of my own patient child,
Mm-hmm.
so that was something I had to be a little careful of just because I do run a little anxious, and I do, I didn't want to think doomsday about things. And so I had to kind of protect my mind a little bit. Um, I didn't listen to any like cancer podcasts. There's some out there. I don't know. I just, because I was already in the cancer world, it was a little too soon. I felt like to just like immerse myself. I think the biggest resource for me was the Bible. I know that sounds so cliche, but the Bible and the Psalms. I really sat in the Psalms a lot, because I just felt like David was suffering and David was running for his life. And so many of the verses, I related to, like there's the verse, I think it's 16:8, I'm not sure, but I will not be shaken because you are right beside me. The Lord, like I will not be shaken because you are right beside me. And that was when I said over and over to myself, because I was like, God is here in this room. God is with me right now. He's right beside me, And so I think that, I don't know, I didn't really find a lot of comfort in like other resources, but I really had to kind of get as close to God as possible, which I know sounds a little obscure, but I think when you're in those moments, like your Bible and asking God to search your heart and bring you to verses that will comfort you, that was really encouraging for me personally. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Psalm 16:8. I will always let the Lord guide me because He is at my right hand. I will not be shaken.
Yes.
And maybe other similar places that's said in different ways in the Psalms and other places in Scripture as well. But it's very powerful. I think a lot of people want to know they're not alone, and that's the message of hope we can give people in Christ is that you're not alone, that God is with you, that
Mhm.
Jesus will never leave you,
Yes.
and that you have hopefully some others in your life too, as you did, that
Yes.
were able to be supportive, and so that's really important. I really appreciate what you had to say, just kind of about how sometimes online forums and support groups can become a place of negativity, and again, maybe other people need to commiserate in that way, but for others it might be actually harmful or not allow them to be able to focus on what's in front of them. And I say that because Broken and Mended is a support group ministry, but one of the things that we do, I think, differently than most support groups, because we've had people come into our groups that had been in other support groups for chronic illness, and most of those were not Christian based. And but even some of those that were, it was only about, oh, this is horrible, this is how terrible it is, and it wasn't directional in any way, right?
Oh, that's such a good word to
And
use.
so,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
I made it. I don't. Is it a word directional? I think it's got to be
Well,
right. But
but it's like I felt like that a lot, even in certain let's say therapy. Everyone's like do therapy.
mhm,
I'm not pro or against therapy, but a lot of times when I was in therapy, I just felt like I was rehashing all the bad in my life, and I was like, but I still need direction. I still need to get up, and I need to take care of my kids, and I need to take a shower, and I need to clean my house, and
right.
like I just felt like when you're like you said, when you're just rehearsing the grievances of your life, sometimes there's a place for that. Of course, like we talked about, the Lord is near the brokenhearted, like hurt with those who are hurting. But you also need something to spark you back to life. Because I didn't want our identity as a family to be like the cancer family. Like I didn't want that to be like, our existence. And so, sorry, continue whatever you were saying, but I really like that word. I think it's a good word to use for maybe a more life support group versus just like doomsday
And
things.
that's a good word, life-giving support group, because that's what we endeavor, to do with Broken and Mended. And so I will say, for people out there that are looking for that kind of support, but you've had a negative experience, to give Broken and Mended a try. If and nothing is right for every person and in every time, so that's something. But we really do also focus on things like spiritual formation. In fact, just for the sake of this discussion, and if our audience is curious, I can tell you kind of the things that we emphasize. We do emphasize lament because lament is important. Grieving is important,
Yes.
but we also emphasize spiritual formation because God is not done with us. He's still taking us somewhere, through this trial.
Yeah.
We emphasize identity because illness is not our identity. Our identity is being made in the image of God and redeemed into that image through Jesus Christ. And
Yes.
we emphasize community. In other words, being together for one another. And so I think that kind of keeps us balanced when we're trying to think about how to, when we're making our curriculum and things like that. So I really appreciate you bringing that point up, actually, because it makes a good point. And there are unhealthy type forums that people can get into. And maybe there's the type that are just maybe plainly unhealthy, and then there's the type that just may be unhealthy for you. They just may not be the right,
Yeah.
fit for you and in the time that you're
Exactly,
in as well.
because sometimes the advice I was given is give yourself grace, which of course, you know, but to what end? Because at one point it became like this, okay, but also, like I said, I am someone who my mindset's really important to me. Like I worked with women on mindset. I still do. Renewing your mind, taking your thoughts captive. And so if I'm just constantly functioning from this place of like, oh, it's okay. I didn't do that. It's okay. We're going through a tough time. I wanted, like you said, like God is not done with us and he's using this to form us. And I didn't want to miss that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't want to miss what God was doing because I was so, in sackcloth, like grieving the life I had dreamed of. And of course I had those moments. I did grieve the
Right.
life, but we even considered putting the kids back in school because even the doctors were like, "Oh, you're going to be so busy with Alex, you're going to want the girls out of the way," type of thing. And our really good friend Auden was like, "You know what? That's going to be a lot of loss on your family all at once. We just started this whole new thing. Alex got sick. If you just put the girls back, it's going to be a lot of loss all of a sudden." And we got a lot of godly counsel like that just in our one-on-one conversations with people, to not just like throw everything up in flames, our dreams, and just, I don't know, like you said, like it's not our identity. It is a big part of our life, obviously, and part of our
Mm-hmm.
story, but we didn't want it to be the only thing we talked about or the only thing that
That's right.
out. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your wisdom on that, and I appreciate you sharing this deeply personal story. But I think I can tell in the way that you share it, what you've been talking about, that you don't want it to be wasted. You want it to be used for good. You want God to use it to help
Yes.
others. And so, really appreciate you being with us, today. And certainly we will continue praying. We will join those many thousands of prayer for Alex that he
Thank
continues to
you.
do well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me and listening. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That wraps it up for this session of In the Seams. I will remind our listeners that you can go to brokenandmended.org to see the website, or see the resources that we have there for people. And we look forward to you joining us the next time on In the Seams.